Hello everyone, in this video I will be talking about the Eastern Idaho Open in May of 2023. This was my third tournament in Idaho, and after coming from the first tournament that I had, not doing so great but learning a lot. The second tournament I did very well, and this is the third tournament, so hopefully the third time is the charm. So I was very excited for this tournament, and let's get started with let's see, round one. So round one was against Brett Walker. Brett Walker, as you can see, and I guess as you can see, I have here 1558 rating USCF. I was able to win a lot of points from the previous tournament, like almost 100 points. So I'm going against Brett Walker. Brett Walker here, he as an unrated player, so his first tournament, I'm not sure what his strength is. So that's the tricky thing about unrated players, right? So just like my first tournament, I was an unrated player and people didn't really know what my strength was, and I was drawing against 1700 players, 1650, and doing pretty well against them. So I didn't know what to expect. So for this tournament, actually, I decided to go not with a London system like the previous tournaments, but I decided to go for d4, d4, c4, and then maybe transpose into a London system with starting with kind of like a Queen's Gambit setup. So here I started with d4. The response from my opponent was b6, giving me the center. So here I can actually just probably go e4 and then try to take over the whole center, but I decided to stick to my guns, so I went with c4. And then he gave me the center here. Let me see if I can do. Okay, so he gave me the center here with e6, and I was like, you know what? I'll take the whole center. Like, if you're giving me the center, I'm gonna go for it. So that's what I did. After bishop b7, I went knight c3, defending the pawn here because it's hanging. And now he's pinning my knight. So my knight is not able to move because it's pinned to the king. And now if I don't do anything about this, if I were to develop my other knight or something, he would be able to grab my knight, and then I would take back and he would capture my pawn on e4. So I had to defend it somehow. And here I decided to go with queen c2. Queen c2, the idea is like if he were to grab the knight with the bishop, I can just take it back with the pawn, and I'm still defending the e4 pawn with my queen. So he develops the knight, so putting a lot of pressure here on e4, and I have to defend it somehow. So I defended it like this with bishop d3. Again, if he were to take the knight, I take it back with the pawn, and my e4 pawn is very well defended by my queen and my bishop. So he castles, I develop my knight, and he goes for c5. c5 is a very common move against d4, trying to break the center, trying to induce this pawn take here. If I were to grab this pawn here, there could be some potential open files, but he can always just grab back with the pawn here, and then he would have 3 pawns in the center, which would be pretty good, and I would have an open file here on the d file. So I decided to just push it forward. That way I can block the vision of the light square bishop for the black pieces. He doesn't have to do anything about it, and then he goes for d6. Again, if I were to grab the pawn here on e6, he can just grab it back with the f pawn, and then he still has 3 pawns in the center, and I don't have a pawn in the d file. So the idea of d6 is that he's telling me, okay, next turn I'll probably push this pawn forward, and then even though my light square bishop is not that great, your light square bishop is also not that great. I decided to not do anything about it, and he actually just closed down the position. Here in the future I have ideas of f4 though, so if he were to grab, I can grab with my knight, with my bishop, with my rook, and I have an open file. So that's not too big of a deal. I decided to go with bishop g5. And here in this current position, what bishop do you think for the white pieces is a better bishop? So keep in mind that my pawns here in the center are in the light squares, and then I have a dark square bishop and a light square bishop. So my light square bishop cannot really see anything right now, right? To activate my bishop, I had to move it something like this or like that. And my dark square bishop is pretty good because there's harmony between my dark squares from the bishop and my light squares from my pawns. So my dark square bishop is pretty good, and I wouldn't really want to trade it right away for this knight here, right? I want to keep my dark square bishop. So he develops his other knight to defend his knight that is pinned because the queen is being attacked through X-ray vision. And I decided to bring my rook to b1. So rook a to b1. The idea is to, because the bishop is a little bit trapped, and you don't really want to trade the bishop, but there's nothing to do really. My idea is to bring the pawn to a3. The bishop cannot go back because he will get trapped. So he would just probably grab the knight. I would capture back with the knight, and then at one point I have ideas of b4, breaking these pawns here, and hopefully trying to get a good path towards the d6 pawn, because that will be a weakness, right? There's nothing that can really defend it other than big pieces. Other pawns are not able to defend it. So that's a good weakness to try to target in the future. So rook a b1, and he kicks my bishop out. I don't take the knight, I just retreat, keeping that annoying pin. You know, right? When there's a pin like that, it's very annoying to deal with, especially if your queen is behind it and you have to move the queen. But the good thing is, like, he has the knight on d7 defending this knight. So in this position here, he goes for bishop a6, and it's very common on d4 openings to have the bishop move to a6 to target these pawns. But oftentimes for these positions, you have also a knight targeting this pawn at one point, and you have a bunch of pieces trying to target the c4 pawn. So here it's not super clear, and I decided to go for knight d1, a tricky move. It's a very tricky move. So think about this. Like, why do you think this would be an okay move for the white pieces? Take your time. You can pause the video. So hopefully you were able to come up with the idea of, now the bishop doesn't have any escape squares, right? So if he doesn't do anything about it, if he makes a random move or something, my next move will be to go with a3, only move for the bishop to go back, and then I would be able to trap it with b4. If he captures with the pawn, I capture with my a pawn, and the bishop has nowhere to go. So the tricky idea behind knight d1 is to trap the bishop, because it doesn't have any targets right now. Correct? So this is why my opponent went with the move b5. So b5 gives some breathing room for the bishop. Now I'm not able to trap the bishop with a3 because the bishop can retreat, and if I were to do b4 here, the bishop can always just go back and not get trapped. But the problem is that he gave me a pawn, right? To save his bishop, he gave me a pawn. Now I'm attacking this pawn, defended by my bishop, so he cannot just capture it back. So the bishop has to retreat, and now I'm able to defend my pawn on b5 with my a4 pawn. He tries to undermine my pawn, and I just grab it. He grabs with the bishop, I take it back, and then he takes with the rook, and I defend my a4 pawn with my b3 push. Okay, so now I am up a pawn in my first round, and I'm doing pretty well here. He unpins himself, moves the queen, and then I go for knight d3. The idea of knight d3 is that I'm looking at these squares here, right? So the f5 square, also the c4 square, and the good thing about the c4 square is that the knight here will be able to target some key squares, especially the d6 weakness that we were mentioning before, right? So he moves the rook, and then I just bring my knight to c4, targeting this weakness. Always ideas of, a fork if the rook were to move somewhere. And he moves the queen forward to defend the pawn on d6. And here I move the queen to d3. What's the idea behind the move queen d3? The idea behind this is that through X-ray vision, always looking at this like Superman, we're attacking the rook. So if I were to do like a knight move, like capturing the pawn here or something, I'm always having a discovery attack on a higher value piece. And that is pretty good for me. So my opponent decided to go for the move knight b6. Knight b6, I'm not sure, I don't think it's accurate. That actually gives me a huge advantage here. I want to find the correct sequence, right? So here I started with the move bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6 is good because if we were to grab here my knight with the knight first, I'm able to grab it with the queen, and now the rook is still hanging. So he would probably move the rook, and then I can retreat my bishop somewhere, and I will be here up a minor piece. So I will be totally winning in this position. So I'm able to grab the knight with my bishop, and he grabs back with the pawn, and now I'm able to do knight takes d6. Knight takes d6. Why not knight grabs the knight here? Because he will be able to capture back with the rook, saving the rook. And why not knight takes e5? because in this position, maybe fine still because I'm doing the discover attack on the rook, but he can always either grab with the rook or undouble his pawns. And that's pretty good for him, I think, right? So I'm trying to maximize my gains here, and I decided to go for the move knight takes d6, because here I am attacking also the rook on e8, and if he's trying to save his rook here, I would have a nice outpost for the knight here on f5. And I'll be totally winning here. I can bring my queen and get some checkmates pretty soon after. So the idea here was I just took the pawn on d6 with my knight, and he grabbed it back with the queen, and I was able to just win a rook here, and I'm up the exchange in this position with a pawn too. So here he attacks my queen, I bring my queen back. My idea, not just bringing it here, I didn't want to get attacked by the rook again and lose the tempo. So I just decided to just go all the way back to d3 and then try to go to the other side, to the king side for the black pieces. So here I am attacking a few things, right? So I'm attacking the h6 pawn, which will come with check. And it's very hard to defend because if you bring the king here, I always have ideas of moving my knight to g3 and then having a fork king and queen. So he decided to defend, protect the h6 pawn by moving the pawn to f5, giving away a pawn, but at least defending this infiltration from the white queen. So here I just grabbed the pawn, and he's trying to maneuver his knight to bring it to the defense to help out the king here. Here I go with the move f4. f4, the idea is if he grabs my pawn here, I can always just grab it with the knight, I can grab it with the rook, and then double up my rooks, you know. Actually, probably better would be to grab it with the rook. If they capture my pawn here, maybe this is probably better. Actually, it doesn't matter, you know. The engine says tomato, tomato, both work. The knight works too. But I think the good thing about this move here is that now I'm targeting the f7 pawn, going for a checkmate, and he would have to defend this. Maybe something like rook a7 or queen e7 or something would probably work for him, right? If I have like a pawn push, he can like always do something like this. But right now I'm totally winning. And according to the engine currently right now, it says it's +9. So that is pretty good advantage. So he decides to go for knight e7. Knight e7 attacking my queen. And I just grab the pawn with my queen here, going for an endgame where I'm up the exchange and I have extra pawns here. So he attacks my pawn here on e5, and I just decided to push it. So here, if we were to push it forward, I can always just grab it with check, you know, and wherever he goes, I can just infiltrate. I can either give a check here or just double up. I can do whatever I want, really. I'm up a lot of material. I have a lot of activity. It's very good for me. So here he decided to bring his rook to e8, and I can just grab the pawn with check, rook check. King moves, and I double up my rooks. Here he moves the bishop back, and I have this move. So apparently here the better move is to just to bring the rook to f6 and then target this knight, right? So here, I don't know, there's different ideas. If he were to attack my knight here, I always have, oh no, there's no way I can find this. There's like a computer move that says d6. That is too much. I would probably go with something like this, like targeting the bishop or something. And if it were to move, I can target it again. And if it were to move it again or something, I can always just grab this pawn here. That would be a good idea, a human idea maybe, you know. D6 is pretty crazy. So what happened in the game, I decided to bring my rook to f3. And you can think, hey, there's a fork here, you know. But my idea was, yes, there's a fork, forking both of my rooks, but then I always have these checks in this position here. And here I can always just try to target the bishop again. That was my idea. If you were to move it, I can target it again. If you were to move it again, I always have something like this, and I'm having a battery of the rooks here. Hopefully giving a checkmate pretty soon by maneuvering my knight like this or something, and then be able to provide with some checkmate at one point, or even like this, you know. So that was my plan during the game. So yeah, he can go for the fork, but it doesn't really work for him. So I decided to just target the pawn on h6, sorry. And he tries to try to plant his bishop or something here, plus also defend the pawn on h6 with the bishop while activating it. I attack the bishop. Where's some more moves here? He attacks my b3 pawn, and so in this position I don't rush. So you might be thinking, hey, there's a free pawn on e5. So it is actually not free, because if I were to grab the pawn on e5 with my rook, remember that we've been practicing these exercises in our previous videos, there will be a fork here. The bishop will give me a check to the king on g1, and then at the same time attack my rook on c5 if I were to grab this pawn. And then I would be losing a piece for free. It's not super clear because I have a lot of pawns into play here, but still I don't want to lose a piece for no reason. Yeah. So I decided to give some breathing room for my king to then like push it forward like this and then be able to grab the pawn at one point. He brings the rook to b4. He can always grab this pawn here. It wouldn't be ideal, so I decided to go for a pawn push, attacking his bishop. So here he retreats the bishop to e7, which is a mistake, because here now I just have h5. And remember that he brought the bishop here to e7 because it's defended by the knight. But now I am attacking the knight. So if he moves the knight somewhere, I can always just grab the bishop here, you know? So here, because he's just losing the piece anyway, he decided to just go for c4. I grab the knight, and he grabs the pawn with his rook. And here actually I can just grab the rook here. Oh, it says. So what I did was rook takes c4. That's what I did. But maybe also this will work, because if he grabs here, I can just take the bishop first. Actually, it doesn't really work much, because then he has like the check here, and if I move now, he takes here. It's clearly winning, obviously, and you can like choose your poison, I guess. But this is what I did. I went for rook takes c4, and he decided to go back. And the idea is, because if he doesn't go back, if he moves somewhere, attacks my knight or something, I just have checkmate in 2, right? So something like this, and that would just be checkmate. The king is very trapped here by the rooks. So he has to just retreat, and then I just grab the bishop, and then he brings the rook to g8. The idea is like the rook cannot move anywhere. So if the rook tries to go attack my knight again, we have the ladder mate here. So he decides to go to g8, and then that just gave me checkmate in 1 by finding rook h7 checkmate. So that was round 1. I'm not sure what his strength is, or was at that point, like online strength, because it was his first tournament, unrated player, very hard to tell what his actual strength is. But I was able to win the game. I was very happy with round 1. So now we can move on to round 2. Round 2 was against Hans Morrow. Hans Morrow was a 5-time state champion. He's an older gentleman, a lot of experience, and he's a 1900 rated player. So Hans Morrow, definitely one of the highest rated players. I think he was the highest rated player at that event. Oh no, he was the second highest, because the highest was someone that was 1968 or something. So Hans Morrow, the second highest rated player at the event. For my round 2, so I had to play well against him. The good thing is like that I had the white pieces, and usually, as you know, the white pieces start with an advantage, and you cannot dictate where the game is gonna head from the first move, but then your opponent will give you a response, and then see what kind of game we're actually having, you know. So I went for d4, as I was mentioning. This tournament I decided to go for d4, c4, and we go into Queen's Gambit decline. Queen's Gambit decline after the move e6. And here I went for captures. So here normally you can just develop your knight, any of the knights, and go like that, right? So here I was deciding to start with a Queen's Gambit situation, you know, d4, then c4 after d5. And then I wanted to bring my bishop out. So it's still kind of transposing into like a London system from previous tournaments that I experienced, but having the c file open. That was my idea for this tournament. So I went with that. Knight c3, he went for knight f6, and then here just bishop f4. Bishop f4, just developing my bishop. I don't want to lock my bishop in, right? Whenever I do e3, the idea is like I want my bishop to be out. So that's what I did. a6, e3, and the idea now is like e3, my bishop is out, I'm able to just bring my light square bishop into the play. He wants to trade the bishops, I go for it, that's fine. And remember, like the good idea about this is that I'm able to trade my dark square bishop because that is not my good bishop because my pawns are in dark squares. Yes? So my good bishop here would be the light square bishop because there's harmony between the pawns and the bishop. You know, the bishop is able to look at the light squares and my pawns are able to look at the dark squares. So they're not bumping into each other. So after this, I developed my knight. And here I was just really prepared for him to bring the bishop to g4. And my response would probably be to like bring the bishop to e2. A little bit defensive, but I'm getting rid of that pin. That is very annoying. But here he went with knight b d7. Knight b d7 to me was a little bit strange. Here, very common response would be castles and then do whatever. Maybe like bishop f5 at one point or something. But after this move, I said, you know what? I don't have to play defensive with my bishop. I don't have to bring it to e2. I can actually just bring it to d3. A better square. So ideally, the light square bishop, I would want to bring it to d3. It has a better scope, better visual of the whole board here along the diagonals. Bishop on e2 is usually just a defensive method whenever they do bishop g4. So here, you know what? Okay, he's giving me the opportunity. I'm just bringing my bishop to d3. That's fine. Castles, castles. Rook e8, and I do a little battery situation here. Always, so if he ever moves the knight somewhere, I can always give a check here by capturing the pawn on h7. So he decides to defend it like this with g6. A very common move too would be to bring the pawn to h6, but then the problem with this is like you're always having a light square bishop being annoying covering this h7 square, which, yeah, you gave some breathing room to your king, but it cannot really breathe because the bishop is always targeting that h7 square. So he decided to go with g6, which is a fine move. And why is it fine? Because, yeah, it weakens the dark squares. I can see some dark square here on the king, but I don't have a dark square bishop, you know? And ideally, I would want to have my queen here and then my knight at one point here and be able to just push my pawns or something, maybe try to get rid of this f6 knight. But that will take a long time to get to that point, right? So I just developed my rook a to c1. So what is the idea behind this move? Rook a to c1 is that if I were to move my c3 knight anywhere in the next turn, I move it, let's say, to e2 or whatever. Now I'm having, through extra evasion, I'm targeting the pawn indirectly, for now, the pawn on c7. If I move my knight, I'm able to just capture this pawn here because he would be able to capture my queen back, and then I just bring in the rook. And I will be able to win a pawn. So sometimes if you're not super sure about what to do in your games, what's your plan, try to target some weaknesses. And try to develop your pieces to better squares where you can actually target some weaknesses that are not super well defended or things like that. So here he's able to defend it, and that's the thing. That's the idea of like thinking ahead, right? He's like, okay, he's gonna move his knight next, so I should, like, as a preventative measure, just might as well defend this pawn like this, connecting his pawns, defending it well with other pawns. It's pretty good. So I decided to bring my rook to e1, and he goes with king forward. Maybe ideas for him would be to maybe push the pawns because he's a higher rated player by a lot of points. He definitely wants to create some imbalances in the position and play risky. Whenever you are a stronger player, and if you play a little bit risky, you can take advantage of that, and you can capitalize on certain mistakes that your opponent might be doing, like maybe overextending or things like that. And then you'll be able to win because you have more experience, right? So here he's trying to play a little bit risky, bringing the king forward, maybe with some future dubious plans that maybe he will be able to capitalize on that and maybe win. So I just moved my knight to e3. Idea is maybe I have some future better prospects of the knight on f4, maybe g3, and then try to like create some play like this. Maybe the knight to g3 to then like have a good push on e4 or something. he brings a knight here. And you know what? I said, I'm just gonna trade this knight with the bishop. Like, my black square bishop is good, but the knight on e4 is very annoying. I can always just, you know, the problem is, like, if I were to do something like this, he doesn't have to grab my knight. He can always just go with something like this. And if I were to grab with the knight, I would fork my pieces here. And if I were to grab with the bishop here, he still has a lot of play going in, and my advantage is going down as the black pieces. So yes, I did this move, and then here I just decided to grab the knight with my bishop. Maybe not the best play according to computer, but I thought that he might want to play some risky chess. And here, if he were to grab with the rook, I would just probably develop my knight with tempo, attacking some pieces. He would have to like retreat, and my light squares are open a little bit again. So he actually grabbed it back with the pawn, and now this is a little bit unbalanced, but I'm able to just target the pawn right away. If he doesn't do anything about this, let's say he makes a random move, I can just grab this pawn here for free. If he captures like this, I would just be up the exchange, so he wouldn't, or the exchange. So he wouldn't really do that. So he defended like this, which means that this is a very unbalanced position. The king is very open. He's playing risky chess because he wants to win. He's a higher rated player. So I need to play accurate to try to win, right? So someone is going to win here because the position is very, very spicy. So I decided to go with queen c3. Natural move, just because I am looking at the king through X-ray vision. And the idea is if he doesn't do anything about it, I can always just bring the pawn forward. If he defends like this, I can always just grab here. If he takes, I can take here, and I will just be up a full pawn for no reason. So he won't really do something like that. And he covers the king with the knight. Any future ideas here, maybe move the king somewhere else and then have the knight be planted on d5 and create a good outpost. So I decided to kick the queen out, and think about this d2 knight. Where would be the ideal square for this knight? Think about it, right? So here you just saw that I made the move c4. Well, what's the point of c4? Knight to c4. To then bring it to some key squares, right? So we have b6 and we have e5. If somehow I'm able to get rid of this knight and I'm able to put my knight on e5, that is amazing. Knights are usually 3 points for the value, the point value, as well as the bishops, and the rooks are 5 points, right? But if I'm able to bring my knight to e5 and there's no other knight that can get rid of it, is my knight really 3 points? I would think it's probably like a 5-point value, because to get rid of this knight, you would have to trade your rook, and that would be you'd be down the exchange for an endgame position. So that was my idea. Attack the queen. Now I bring my pawn to b4 to gain some space, prevent some pushes. Like now I'm preventing a5. I can just grab it with a knight. So here he targets my queen, attacks my queen at the same time, and my pawn as well. So here I want to try to keep the pin here, because if the knight were to move somewhere at one point, I can always do the push, remember? So now he attacks my pawn with both pieces, the knight and the queen, and I just defend it with my pawn. Preventing any push like this, I can always just grab it like this or like this. And same with this one, I will just be able to grab it with the knight. And if he trades like this, doubles my pawn, but I will be up the exchange. So here he just develops the bishop, and I'm able to move my knight. So what was the problem about the move knight e5? The problem with this move is that how can you get rid of my e5 knight? How? If you want to get rid of my knight with your knight, you would have to move your knight a bunch of times to be able to target my knight. So it will be 1, 2, 3, 4. In 5 turns, you will be able to actually capture my knight. That's a long time. I will be able to develop a bunch of pieces and like create some good plays from at that point. So my knight is very strong. It's a good outpost, very strong knight, covering some good squares. And I wouldn't want to trade my knight for this bishop right now, right? Because the bishop cannot really see anything. You cannot like look through the pawns, and my knight is covering very good squares in the dark squares. So here he goes for h5, weakening more the king here, and that's fine. And then here I just try to go for what is a piece that he can like create play with his knight. So I want to get rid of this knight, and I want to play with my knight against his bishop. That's the ideal plan. So he actually lets me. I grab the knight and I start trading pieces because I decided, you know what, I'm gonna play against this bishop. This knight will never move from here. So he goes like that. Obviously he wants me to grab the bishop here, and I decided to go with rook c5. Apparently top computer move. And the idea of rook c5 is like, you cannot really kick my rook out because I can just grab your bishop like this, right? You would just be down a full piece for no reason. So you cannot really kick the rook out, and my idea is to like create a battery with the queen and the rook, and then at one point be able to win a pawn, and then have my two passers here and promote into a queen soon after. So here I went with rook c5. He brings the rook to c7, and here I create the battery. And then he moves the queen to d6. Here will be a good move to play. So here actually, after the game, when I was like thinking about it without the engine, but I was like, you know what? And this is a move that I did later, but I should have done it right now. And that move was h4. I should have done this right now. I did it later on, and according to the computer, it's the best move. And it's good because you're giving some breathing room to your king and creating the good habits of never getting a background checkmated here, right? So h4 will be good because you prevent any pawn push, and you will just be able to grab it with no problem. And I should have just done that, but instead I went for a4. The idea of a4 is that you cannot really grab the pawn with the bishop because you will just be able to win a lot of material here, you know? Maybe not even taken, but it would just be up a rook, you know, for no reason. So the idea of this as well is like, if he doesn't do anything about this, my next move is just b5, right? So you cannot capture with the bishop because you can just you win a piece. And if you grab with the pawn here, now the bishop is pinned to the rook, and if they don't do anything again, you will just be able to capture this piece like this, and then be able to win the whole game, maybe with something like this, you know. So he has to prevent that that push, and he goes for after a4 he went for rook e7, preventing that. So now if I were to do something like this, he can always just retreat the bishop somewhere. Here I made the move queen c3, which leads to, so right now we're +2 for the white pieces with a decent engine. But here I made a huge blunder. I gave away a pawn for no reason. I miscalculated things. Here again, I should have just gone for something like maybe like h4, or, well, not right now. Right now I should just probably like defend my pawn with like something like this. But I blundered a pawn, and then I did h4. So right now it should be a draw. It's zeros for the according to the evaluation. And he brings in the bishop here. So here I'm able to steal, even though I'm down a pawn, I can create some play. Now I'm down a pawn. Now I'll be able to like get rid of my knight probably for the bishop at one point. So here I'm targeting the pawn here. If the bishop were to move somewhere at one point, I can always just capture this, like this, anyway. So he moves the king back. He doesn't really have much play, right? So all the pieces are stuck. There's nothing he can do, like, really here. And I'm able to just grab the bishop with a knight. So yes, I am down a pawn, but here actually, and this is the best move. So here is back to +3, plus 3.17. So I'm able to grab the bishop and create some calculation, some play here, because he has to, if he grabs with the queen, obviously I would just take like this. So he grabs it back with a pawn, and leaving this pawn hanging on a6, and I grab it. So here he defends his c6 pawn with the rook on e6. I was expecting more, something like this, like maybe rook c7 or something. But yes, rook e6 is the best move. And here, apparently, like, the best move, according to the computer, is queen b7. Queen b7 or something. Creating some play, maybe you give some checks at one point or something, and then you always have ideas of something like, if they don't do anything, right, they move the king, you always have b5. If they capture, you have some checks, and that will probably be like you either win the queen or give some checkmates, right? So that's the best move here according to computer. I decided to go with the move b5. So b5, I just give away a pawn. Not really, but here they just captured, or hands just capture here, and I went with check. So here I'm thinking the king is very weak, the king is very open, and my pawn on h4, it's very strong because it will never allow the king to go to g5. So we're cutting some squares from the king. So if I'm able to have a couple pieces here, then that will almost be checkmate against the black king, right? So I'm thinking, okay, I need to play active here. Kind of gave away a pawn, not really, but then we're going for this. He moves the king forward, and here I'm thinking, if somehow, well, first of all, the best move according to the computer is just, I didn't play the best move according to the computer, but I played it soon after. Okay, so here I just grabbed the pawn on b5, and I shouldn't have. Apparently there's just a better continuation here where you would be able to win a pawn later on with computer play. But here I just decided to grab the pawn. Okay, my opponent goes for f4, and then I said, ideally, if I'm able to bring my pieces and my queen especially to f8, I win the game. That's what I thought. So I said, how can I make that happen? The king cannot really escape anywhere here. If I give some checks or something to the king is about like pretty trapped here, right? So if somehow I'm able to bring my queen to f8, I win the game. So I thought, how can, like the queen is protecting f8 right now, how can I make the queen be blocked and not see f8? And this is what I did. I decided to go with the move queen b7, check. Queen b7 check. My hope was for him to block it with the rook. And that's what he did. He went for rook e7. Rook e7 now blocks the black queen from protecting f8. And here I went for the move that the computer wanted me to do like a few moves before, but I did it now. Still kind of works, but he can like actually try to defend it with rook f7, so the queen can still like look at the squares again and maybe like have some like skip squares for the king. Still not super clear, but my opponent here grabbed the pawn on e3, and that throws the game. You can pause the video and try to find the sequence, and try to find the multiple lines that makes you win this game. So now the evaluation went to plus 9.45, plus 10 pretty much, because we can find here the move rook g8. If the king were to move somewhere here, for example, to h6, you can always give a check here, or I think you first start with a check here on the queen, with the queen, right? And then something like this, that will just be checkmate. If you block with the rook, you can always just grab the queen here. You can even like start with a check like this. They give up, and that's actually just checkmate right there because the rook is pinned. So the king cannot go this way, and for example, if the king goes here to h7, you can always give another check. King goes back, and then you will just finish the game with checkmate here on f8 with the queen. So here my opponent, he went with king f6, and I was able to give a check with the queen on f8. The idea is he actually moved the king to, let's see, I think here he resigned. So my opponent resigned here. And why? Let's look at the different lines. Right now, if the king goes to e6, I can just win the queen like this. With check, cannot cover with anything. King moves there, and you even capture with a check. And then you'll be able to win a pawn or something, and then just win the game from there. What if the rook blocks here the check? Now you just win you win a queen with check. You know, and then wherever the king goes, you can even give more checks and probably mate pretty soon here, like this, you know. So and if the king goes somewhere there, you can still give checkmate in like multiple ways. You know, you can choose your weapon. Yes. So that's why my opponent here, after queen f8, he resigned, and I was able to defeat a 1900 player, 5-time state champion of Idaho. And yes, that was round 2 right there. Hopeful, like that was a very interesting game. Very interesting game. So let's move on to the next round. Round 3. So round 3 was against Olivia Ding. Olivia Thing here, her rating is 1278. I think currently she's over 1600, close to 1700 USCF. And Olivia Thing is a very strong player. At this event, on round 1, she was able to defeat a 1968 rated player, the highest seed of the event, the highest rated player of the event. So she was able to defeat on round 1 the highest player in the event, making him withdraw from the event. He left the tournament after that round, after he lost. So she's a very strong player, you know. So let's get started with the game. So she's a d4 player, so she plays d4. Responded with knight f6, c4, e6, and then heading towards the Nimzo defense. But it will be a Nimzo defense if I were to just go for bishop b4. Very common move. The idea of bishop b4 here is like, if you don't defend this, even though you might have heard that you don't want to trade your bishops for a knight without a purpose, and the purpose here is actually to damage the structure of the white pieces. And at one point here, you can even go for c5. If they grab the pawn here, then look at this. This is like a little train situation going on. So you will be able to target the pawns easily and then grab all this and then have a 2-on-1 on the queen side and be able to probably win the endgame here. So very common idea on the Nimzo defense. But here I decided to go with b6, a little more calm approach. Just bishop b4 is just so much better. And I went like this, bishop there. So I wanted to prevent any, pins here on my knight. So I just moved my bishop once, defending my knight here. E3, d5. She just moves the bishop there, and this is a very common move here. So I went for taking on c4. Very common move here. If we have this tension going on between the pawns here, there's some friction going on. If they were to develop their bishop, now you can grab this pawn, and then you are saying, you know what, your bishop moved twice, you lost like some tempo, I guess. It's still playable, but you kind of like say, hey, you moved it twice, so I should be better. So I grabbed it, she grabs it, I castles, and I developed my knight defending, and then I went for rook c8. Queen e2, creating a good battery here, because maybe at one point she wants to get rid of my light square bishop, which is pretty strong here along the diagonal, right? And I go for h6, kicking the bishop out. The bishop has now a good visual here on my c7 pawn, and I just push my pawn forward. Very common idea here. If they were to grab this, I can always just grab it with a bishop, with a knight, and then it's a 2-on-2. D4 positions are very drawish, and I think it's usually because of this kind of situation. So she brings the rook there, and here we can calculate a few lines. So here the best move according to computer is to just take the pawn here on d4. And the idea is like, if they were to grab back with the rook, defending this one here you can just grab the knight. And if you were to grab it with the queen, you have some moves like e5. And we can keep in mind that the rook cannot really go anywhere without leaving the bishop. So here, for example, if they were to grab your pawn, you're like, oh, I can just grab this pawn here. But you can actually grab the bishop with the knight. Your queen is under attack, but for example, if they grab it like this, you have an in-between move with check. They have to capture here, and you can either capture it like this, and the bishop's still hanging, and then there's a lot of, like right now, you're just up a full piece. So that will be the idea of then, even though you have a light square bishop that is pretty strong, you can get rid of it to damage the structure. So ideally here, they wouldn't take it with the queen, but we have the same ideas of e5 in this position. So if they capture it like this, you can always just capture the bishop with your rook. And if they capture it with the queen, you can capture the bishop with your knight, giving away the queen, but then winning their queen. If they grab your rook, you grab it with the bishop, and then you're saying that you have two pieces for the rook, and then it's still not super balanced, but you have to like create some place, right? They have a rook and a knight, but you have two knights and a bishop, so it's still not super clear. It says minus 0.2 advantage for black, but you still need to play the game. So that was one of the lines here. And here, so yes, ideally, maybe it would have been better to just take with the pawn, but I went for this line first. I went for the bishop takes knight on f3, and she captured it with the queen, right? So ideally, if she captured, like the idea is like for her to damage this pawn structure, and then for me to grab this pawn and maybe like, you know, some ideas in the future. She grabbed it with the queen, and then I grabbed this with my pawn. The idea is the bishop is hanging. So here she can probably just, the idea was if she were to do something like this, I can always do the idea of forking the pieces, right? And if they capture like this, I always have this idea. If they capture my queen, I have the in-between move of check, and then capturing like this, winning the full piece. So that was more or less the idea behind that play. So I captured this, but then she went for bishop a6. Bishop a6 targeting my rook, and I'm thinking here, you know what? She can grab my rook, but I'm winning a piece here, right? A minor piece, and I grab it back with the queen, and here she captured back with the rook. So here I made a mistake of bringing my queen to a8 to trade the queens, because I'm thinking, you know what, I'm up a piece right now, or 2 pieces for the rook at least. So here the better move would have been to just go for like queen a6. Keeping the queens, I still have this, but the problem with this is like now I'm giving her a lot of play, a lot of activity. I would have to defend my knight, she brings the queen, I can try to attack the rook, and a lot of play here going on. See, if I do something like this, apparently there's like a sacrifice of a minor piece again, because she can like just win pieces back. And at the end, it would just be something like 2 pieces for the rook. Not super clear. Here, apparently black is winning after a5. And still, this would be some good chess to play. It would lead to some good lines and some good end games and maybe memorable games, but still not super clear. So I decided to, let's see, I decided to go for this move, queen a5, queen a8. Queen a8 gives away the queen, and here I thought of, you know what if I bring my rook here to d8, I just give her a lot of play. And it's not super clear for me, because now I'm just giving away like more pawns. Yes, I am up a piece, a minor piece, but I'm giving a lot of pawns, and she still has 2 rooks, you know, and I have 2 minor pieces for the rook. So not super clear for me, because she has like 2 pawns here, and like these pawns might fall pretty soon. I don't know. So I didn't want to do that, and I just gave away the piece just back like this. And this should just be a draw. I shouldn't have done that. I was winning with the other line, sorry, but that's also with computer moves, right? So this is thinking about, hey, like you're winning here. Yes, you're winning, but if you make all the computer moves, you know. But I'm not a computer, so I don't think I'll be able to. Maybe I could win, but it's a little bit tough. So the idea here is that I have some like pawns in the light squares in the middle, dark squares. It's not super clear. So this one should be like it should be a draw. It was zeros. Right now it's giving like a very slight advantage to black with like minus 0.17, which is pretty much a draw. So here I needed to find like some accurate moves to keep the advantage. But here after h5 it's just zeros. And then I go for a rook trade. And here, how can I play this position? Because Olivia asked me, she wanted to draw the game. So she asked me, hey, she offered me a draw. She offered me a draw once, and I said no. Then after a few moves, she offered me a draw again, and I declined again. And I said, let's just play on. Let's see what happens. You know, let's try to prove it. And that's something very, very common too. If I just felt like I was a stronger player, and I said, you know what, I have better. Like a better advantage, I guess, or better chances to win in the game, even though it's a draw. Prove it. You know, I'm telling pretty much my opponent, prove it that it's a draw. So we played, and here my idea is I have a dark square bishop here, and I'm trying to prevent the king infiltration. You know, so how can I prevent that? So she went with f3. I grabbed the pawn on f3, and now there's a weakness here. It's a little bit hard to get to this weakness, you know, with a king, but that will be ideal. So now I'm bringing my king in, and I prevent the king infiltration on c4 with my pawn on b5. Yes. So we can see that the bishop here is covering along the diagonal, and then my b5 pawn is also covering the c4 square. So we're not letting the king in on this side, on the right side of the board. So she goes for a4. Here I can always just probably grab the pawn here, but then white will be winning because now the king has the c4 square and he can always move to the right side of the board. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to allow that. This square for me is very important, c4 square. So I just defend this pawn like this with a6. So if she were to grab the pawn here, I would just grab with this pawn, and I'm always keeping, you know, this square covered. So she pushes the pawn forward to e4. I bring my king up, and then f4. The idea is to maybe trap the bishop and gain a lot of space here. I push my bishop to the other side like this because I always want to keep this blocked. I want to close that gate. I don't want to allow her in. That's the idea. So e5, and here I need to find, according to the computer, I need to find the move king f5, right? So after some ideas of like captures and king to e3, I can always do g5, and then undermining the whole situation here. And I would grab this. If she grabs the bishop here, I can grab it, and then like I don't know, I have some play here. But if she goes with something like that, I can always just win a pawn, right? So that's the idea. That's according to the computer. I didn't do that, obviously. Or not obviously, I guess I could have found it, but I didn't play like that. I took my time, I thought, but I thought that the better approach was just to go with f6. f6 still like very drawn game. But I wanted to go with f6 because now if she were to capture, I can always just capture with a pawn, with a king, and then be able to target these pawn islands. Because there's a pawn island on h3, there's a pawn island on f4, and then at one point maybe try to deflect the king to the left side of the board to then go to the right side of the board and maybe grab the b3 pawn at one point. So she took, and I took with the g pawn. So g takes f6, king f3, king e3, and then I just push my pawn forward. The idea of this move is that I'm not allowing her bishop this way here, and then I'm covering some key squares here. So look at this. My bishop is looking along the diagonal here, the d4 square. Now the pawn is looking at the e4 square, and this c pawn is looking at the c4 square. So the king cannot go like this at all. So because the king now has been blocked by my own pieces, those squares, now my king can move freely somewhere, right? So here's still drawn, but I'm able to find this move after king d3. She pushes the pawn forward to h4, and here I'm able to find king c5. King c5 is a very good move because now she gives me a check, and I bring my king in to b4, and she tries to defend her king, her pawn like this. Maybe here she should have just like grabbed the pawn here. But she defended the pawn with the king there, and I'm able to just win a pawn here. So after declining the draws, you know what? I said it's an endgame, and endgames are tough. And endgames are tough for lower rated players as well. So I thought that, you know what? I have a big chance of winning this because she might make a mistake at one point. And she did at this point, right? So she went for like king c2. I'm able to win a pawn. And then here I went with bishop f6. After bishop f6 and her following move, she went for bishop d2. And after she made that move, she went like, oh. She knew that she made a mistake here. Because maybe a better move would have been to just bring the bishop here, defending this pawn here. And now she just gave me another pawn. And now allowing my h pawn to just become a passer. So she's bringing her king in. I'm able to bring my bishop here to block any infiltration from the bishop. And she just starts going for my f5 pawn, and I'm just able to promote into a queen. After king e5, and I go bishop g3, she resigns. Because at one point here, I can always just grab this pawn. If she moves away, I can always just do something like this. If she takes, I have a passer here, and I can always even, like, if anything, I can just sacrifice my queen for the bishop and just promote into a new queen. So that was round 3. Very good game against Olivia. Very strong player, but I was able to get a good win in the end game there. A very drawn end game, but I was able to manage that. So round 4. So round 4 was against Jeremy Thomas. Jeremy Thomas was he actually won the previous tournament, the one in Eastern Idaho Open in September. So the previous video from the P.E.T. playlist, he won that tournament. So it was his first tournament, and after that tournament, he got the rating of 17-23 after his first tournament. So it's pretty good. Very strong player. So yes, we need to try to win here somehow. So I started with d4. As I said, I was keeping this consistent with throughout the tournament, just d4, c4. And here we go into Slav defense. Not a Queen's Gambit decline, but we go for the Slav instead. And here my idea was always to just capture, and open the c file for my rook to be on c1 at one point in the future. So here I developed the knight, developed my bishop, same concepts that I was keeping throughout the tournament. e6, and I develop my knight. He brings the bishop, and again I have a nice light square bishop with my dark square pawns. So I was pretty happy about that. And throughout the whole beginning of the game, I guess, until the middle game and towards the end game, I was always having an advantage of like plus 0.4, plus 0.5. So here, bishop back, castles, and now e5. Now e5 opens up the scope of the bishop, and at one point he can try to pin my knight. So here I just went for captures, takes, and then queen there. I bring my queen out like this, and then he's threatening checkmating 1. So I saw that. I felt like, for example, yeah, if I go h3, he can just give me checkmating 1. If I go g3, the problem with this move, I think that he has a light square bishop. So at one point he can always take advantage of the light squares, maybe like this or maybe like this. So I didn't want to do that. So I decided to just trade the queens like this, right? So I took with the h pawn, bishop there centralizing. I'm targeting the weakness, targeting the isolated pawn here. He defends it like this, knight e2, and here rook c8, and I plant my knight. A very good outpost here, very centralized knight, pretty good one. And here I start moving my king and preventing some knight jumps here. So like we can see that the knight jump on c4 was pretty good, defended by the pawn. So I just prevent that, bring the king in. And the idea here is like if he were to give me a check here or something, I always have f3 defended by the g pawn. So just expansion, regular moves. Now I bring the pawn in. I just capture. We're just heading towards a drawn endgame. But here he has like an advantage with like minus 1.3 or something. From here on now, he has some like advantage, but we are not engines, we're not computers, so we're not playing the most accurate chess. King there, check. It can kind of move forward or anywhere because of the bishop. Just some moves like this, and here he goes for c4. I grab it, he takes it like this. I bring my king here, attack the rook, check, things like this. And just very so here he grabbing on b3 with the bishop is just a draw pretty much. Maybe better idea. Apparently the computer wants him to grab the pawn with the rook. If I'm able to grab the bishop, I weaken his e pawn, but then he has play, right? Because he has some targets here on the g file. So a common move would be for me to target this pawn here. He can always just give away the pawn. But then if I grab the pawn, he can always give me a check, grab some more extra pawns here. And then after something like this, it will be like a repetition, like it could be a draw, but it has some advantage for the black pieces. So this didn't happen. So after bishop takes b3, that's pretty much a draw here. I defend the pawn, try to defend everything, and here I start getting an advantage. So here I went for check, and here I went for a king here. And that's fine. Right now I'm winning. It's just like plus 0.6, plus 0.5. And here the idea would have been to, let's see, after king c5, okay, yeah, I found a good move where like almost +1 advantage, but I need to be accurate with my moves. I need to play computer moves. And he grabs a pawn, and I give a check. I grab a pawn, and here bringing the king up is just a draw. So here a better idea would have been to move my rook to, well, first of all, it says like give a check, but I can always just go with like rook g7. Rook g7, if you were to grab the pawn here, I always have f5, right? So if he grabs my other pawn, now I have f6. And now the advantage is going up. Now it's like plus 2.15 or something. And the idea is like if you were to bring the king there, because if I bring my pawn here, there's just checkmate almost there, or just ready to promote. If he brings a king there, I always have a check here on the with the d pawn. I can bring my other pawn. If he tries to prevent the promotion, I always have something like rook check. You know, if for example if the king goes there, that will just, you know, be winning on the spot there. So he would have to grab there, and then I'm just up a full rook, and I need to like still try to get rid of all these pawns here somehow, you know. So here I would probably try to, you know, after like something like this, I would just try to grab this pawn here and then bring my king towards the right side of the board to grab the rest of the pawns. So I will be winning in this position. So after king c6, I kind of drew the game because it's just like checks. We grab pawns. Same idea here, f5. He cannot really grab it, but then I just grab the pawn here. Apparently, I had an advantage here. If I had the opportunity to find king b5, which is a little bit crazy, because now I'm giving away a pawn with check, but then I'm coming in, and this is totally winning for the white pieces. Now I'm threatening checkmate, right? So they would have to move the king, and now I have just a check here, and now I'm able to just target the h pawn and then just ready to promote. There's no way to stop this pawn promotion. So if I would have found that move, that would have been great, but that's, I think, a very tough move to find. Maybe not the grandmasters, but so here we just ended up in this situation where here we just agree to a draw. Because he has one pawn, I have one pawn. If he gives me a check, I can always move. If he grabs his pawn, I can just grab his pawn, and then it's just like king and rook versus king and rook with no pawns. That would just be a draw. So my round 4 against Jeremy Thomas, the state champion, or the Eastern Idaho state champion, it was just a draw. So that's fine. Move on to the round 5. For round 5, I went against Gary Hollingsworth, and he was a 15-15 rated player, USCF. I didn't know his openings. I didn't know. For these tournaments, I usually don't like look up what people play and stuff like that. I need to maybe do that, like prep against my opponents. I just haven't bothered with that. So to give you some ideas of what was going on for this round. Round 5. So far, out of 4 rounds, I'm at 3.5 out of 4 out of 4 points. So 3.5 out of 4 points. And Jeremy Thomas is also with 3.5 out of 4 points. And then Niall Mackenzie, which he's someone I mentioned from the first video, my first ever chess tournament video. He's the person who actually I played against, and in round 1. So my first ever chess game at a chess tournament was against him. So he was on board 1, and he was with 4 out of 4. So he was playing against Jeremy Thomas, who I just drew against, and I had to play against Gary Hollingsworth. And for example, if Jeremy Thomas and Niall Mackenzie were to just like draw the game or something, and then I would win my game, I would probably be tied for first place for the Eastern Idaho State Championship or Open. So that was my hope, for them to draw or whatever would happen there, and then for me to win my game. So I had to win this game. Okay. So this is round 5 against Gary Hollingsworth. He went with the move e4, and what do I do against e4? I go for the Caro-Kann c6. c6, d4, d5, takes. So this is the exchange variation of the Caro-Kann. He went for c4, and I went for knight f6, knight c3, e6, and it kind of turns into like a Queen's Gambit decline without the e pawn, without the c pawn, right? Something like that. Knight f3, I develop my knight, and he goes for the bishop f4. And the idea here, I just want to trade that bishop, because if I don't do anything about it, he always has an idea with knight b5, right? If I don't do anything like here, he always has something like this, and I have to be able to find some good moves here. Apparently I have to just like castle, but then this is just kind of annoying. And for example, if this will be even worse, right? I think, because then it'd be kind of tough to stop the double check here. So here I decided to just trade the bishop, take stakes, and the knight went for an attack here. So here I'm thinking like, how can I do something here? Like, what can I do? Because now there's a threat of knight c7 check, forking my king and my rook. And if I were to give a check here or something, he always has something like queen d2. And apparently here I just have castles, which I didn't really like consider during the game, because here if I'm like taking here or something, then it's a little bit tough. There's always he has to take or something, and then he always has this threat, right? Or even like with the king, let's say. Imagine something like this, right? So here I want to like cover this, but then I'm allowing the other knight to come in. So it's a little bit tough to think about things. So here I decided to just move back, keep it simple, bring the queen back to these to d8, covering this c7 square. There's no dark square bishop anymore, so I don't have to worry about it. He pushed the pawn forward. So here I just went ahead and castled, bishop d3, and then h6. Good habits always to have, preventing some knight jumps, but also just giving some breathing room for your king. Not right now because the bishop is covering the h7 square, but in the future if I were to get rid of this bishop, I can always just, you know, escape in case there are some attacks and threats. So castles, and then I went for a6, and then he went in with the actually best move, apparently. No, it's not the best move. The best move would just be to just bring it back. But then in low depth engine, actually, apparently this is like a good move. So here he's still keeping some advantage. And I decided to like go for the trade, right? So if he doesn't do anything, I'm able to just capture the knight and then win a pawn like this. So he just captures my bishop. I capture with a rook. And right now the white pieces are still winning with like a +1 advantage. But that's according to the computer, right? So he goes for a3. Here maybe a good move would have been to... actually, no. If I were to do b6, he always has this capture first. And then... yeah, not so clear. So I went for queen c7. And he went for like b4. So the idea of this move is he has a pawn storm. It's very hard to stop this sometimes, and he's keeping a good advantage. So I decided to go for develop my knight, connect my rooks, and he goes for b5. I felt like b5 wasn't super accurate, so I would think maybe like prepare maybe b5 at one point. So maybe like developing the rook and then going for like a4 b5, something like that. But and because he cannot do a5 a4 right now, because I can just grab the pawn here, right? So he went for this move, and that was a little bit suspicious, a little bit dubious to me, because he just brings the bishop. Yes, I have a weak pawn here, but then at one point I'm able to just do e5, these pawns are gonna be very weak, and then he would have like 3-point islands, right? So he went for this. I decided to bring my knight. I'm not sure why, to be honest, I brought this knight. I thought it was because I wanted to like push this and then maybe take it with a knight. I don't remember anymore. Or also I think it was because I would prevent the knight from jumping here. So I think that was my original idea, to prevent any knight jump here, because now I'll just be able to capture. He captures, I will be able to win a pawn. So now I develop my rook. He brings the queen there. I bring my knight back because I thought like, you know what, I think that was a mistake. And then I just capture like this with my pawn, and then he brings the queen to b6. And I felt like that's just very strange. So first of all, I didn't know what to do. I was thinking bringing the rook or something. But then like this pawn on c6 would be very, very weak. You know? If I were to just do something like this pawn is very weak, and the knight can just target it pretty easily. You know, he could like double up his rooks at one point or something, and then maybe target this c6 pawn, and then his c pawn will be very, very strong. So here I decided to capture the queen. He captures back, and now I kind of fix this pawns. I create some islands here, some weaknesses, and my c pawn is free to always be pushed in the future. I decided to attack the pawn on b6 with my rook. He defends with the rook, and now I attack it with my knight on d7. Now I'm ready to capture this pawn. So here he goes for knight e5. knight e5 to me was a little bit strange, and it gives me a good advantage. But the problem is, like, for example, if I were to capture the pawn here, he can always just capture here, I capture, and then he would just be able to capture the pawn here. And he has a passer here, right? Even though he has a weakness as well, he has a passer. So, not super clear. I mean, I'm winning apparently, but I wanted to prevent anything. So I also thought, you know what? If I get rid of this knight, he will have to take with the pawn, and then I would have two passed pawns. I'll be able to push my pawn up, and I have connect 4. And we know if we have connect 4, we will most likely win the game. Yes. Okay, so I captured the knight, and then decided to attack the pawn on b6. He pushes the pawn forward, of course, and then I bring my rook back to a7. Here, he decided to just attack my pawn on c6. So here, as black, how would you capture the pawn on b7? You can pause the video and take your time. How would you capture it? So I capture with the b rook. Capture it like this, and that's top computer move. Yes. So what happens if I capture with the a pawn, with a rook? The problem with that is that they can always just capture our c pawn, and we would think, oh wait, we have a checkmate. But we don't. They don't have to capture us back. If they capture us back, yes, we have a checkmate. But they can always just bring the other rook to c1. And then there is no more checkmate, and now they have a passer. You know? So, not super clear. Not super clear about what's going on here. So, I decided to capture with the b rook, because now he captures here, and now I was able to find rook takes a3. The good thing about having the habits here, bringing the pawn to h6 is like, if he were to give me a check somewhere here, I can always just do something like this. And now this rook is hanging, and if he were to grab this rook here, I would have checkmate in 2, right? So he cannot take my rook here, and then my king would be safe. So in this position, he grabbed the pawn. I grab his a3 pawn, and he just doubled up the rooks. Okay, so here I decided to just double up my rooks as well, because I'm up 1 pawn in an endgame. So that's a very good advantage. If I'm able to trade all the pieces right now, all the heavy pieces, I have an extra pawn, and I should be able to win the endgame. So I decided to just trade 1 rook. He brings it back, and I just decided to put my rook behind my d pawn because I would just want to push it, you know? So he goes for f4. I decided to go with f6, and he brings the rook to c6. So here I decided to go with the move capturing on e5. Why? Because here, if we were to capture here, my idea originally was to bring my pawn to e4 and have 2 connected pawns in the middle of the board, and then just maybe bring my king at one point, you know, and then help my pawns go forward. According to the computer, apparently here it's just better to just grab this pawn, have these weaknesses, and then maybe like just start pushing this pawn forward. You know, if the king goes there, I can just try to kick the rook out, and then you would have an advantage. You would have an extra pawn, but here it's not super clear, because here like the computer wants you to grab this pawn and then try to, I mean, yes, you're winning with like minus 1.6, but it's very tough to get to this pawn. So in an endgame, like rook, if you have a rook and you have an extra pawn, that's also considered a draw. You have to play perfectly though if you want to win. So it would be very tough to win in this position actually. So after I captured the pawn, he didn't capture with the rook, my e pawn, but he captured back with the f pawn. So here I just brought my king in, and then he went for g4, and I started pushing my pawn forward. My opponent went for king f3, which I think is a dubious move, a little bit critical mistake, I think. Maybe a better move would have been to just go king f2. So king f2, the idea of, so just to show you, right? Because here, if we go here king f3, I can just push my pawn forward, and now my pawn is covering the e2 square. So then the king wouldn't be on time to stop my pawn. He would have to like now bring the other rook and make the rook passive, and I would have time to maybe grab these other pawns. So here, yeah, better move would definitely be king f2, and let's look at this, right? So king f2, I push my pawn forward, king there, and now the king is behind the pawn. You know, he doesn't have to bring the rook to be passive. Now the king can be the passive one. It's a little bit better. So here he goes g4, d4, and then king f3, and that's giving me a good advantage because I can just go for d3. Okay, so now he cannot just, if he goes here, I can just push my pawn forward, you know. So that's pretty winning. In this position, my opponent went for rook d6. So in rook d6, for you to know what was going through my head, I was like, whoa, what do I do now? I had to like think and be like, okay, my pawn, like I cannot just, my first thought was I cannot capture the rook because he just captures, cutting some squares of the king. And then if I move here, king goes there. If king takes, actually I would be up a pawn, so it wouldn't be too bad. So that was my first thought, right? I said, you know what? I can get closer to my rook. If he captures, he gets close. I will go to c6. If he captures here, I can go here, blocking the e4 square. If he moves somewhere, I can just grab the pawn on e5. So that will be winning as well, right? So let's see here. You would lose some advantage, but you're still winning. So right now it's minus 6.37. And here you just have to find the move. Rook takes d6, and that's what I did. I went for this move because I said, you know what? I'm just going to capture. If he captures, I'm going to go around and grab the pawn like this. That's what I thought. But after this, it took me making the move to then have a better visual of better moves. So after he grabbed the move, grabbed the rook, he went, I actually just found the move e5. Best move. This gives you like minus 8.53 advantage, which is huge. It's like having almost a queen, right? And it's because you're about to have a queen. Why? Because now if he's able to go to e3 to try to stop the pawn on d3, now you have the move e4. You don't have to worry about them moving the pawn forward like this because your king is on time to stop the promotion. But here, finding this move after king e3, finding e4, that just wins the game. Because if they were to capture the pawn on e4, you can just push your pawn forward onto d2, and the king cannot make it in time to stop the queen, the promotion. So after e4, my opponent resigned, and I won the 5th round, putting me at 4.5 out of 5 points for the total for the event. And I had to just wait for the game between Jeremy Thomas and Niall Mackenzie. And just to give you an idea of what happened there, their game was a drawn position. They had, each player had some pawns and a knight, each person, and it was a totally drawn position. But I think it's because Jeremy, he had to travel to Japan the following day. He was pretty tired and he had to wake up very early. So maybe he was not in his element and he lost the game. So Niall won the game, the drawn position. He won the game. He was able to clutch in the win. And that put Niall in first place for the total event, for the overall event. And that put me in second place. So I actually got second place at the Eastern Idaho Open in May of 2023. Got second place, and they even took a picture for the winner and also for the runner-up for me. And I'll show you right now. I was able to make it into the chess newsletter for the Idaho Chess Association. And it was good. It was a good event. I felt like I did really well. I had my chances, against Jeremy Thomas. I could have clutched in the win, but it didn't happen. So it's okay. It happens. So hopefully I'll be moving out of the state toward the end of this year. So I have one more chance or a couple more chances to try to win an event here, an open in Idaho. So I'll try to do it. I'll be also going to the National Open in Las Vegas this year. So if you guys go there, let me know. It'll be nice to meet you guys. But yes, this was the event. This was the result, second place. I think my best result so far in an open event. And I hope you were able to enjoy it. So any general tips from this tournament that I learned? It was just calculate. Try to think of different lines. Take your time. And sometimes if you cannot really see something, you can take some more time to think about the different lines. But then sometimes whenever you actually make some moves, you can have a better perspective of like what's there, like in this game against Gary Hollandsworth, just grabbing the rook and then being able to see, wait, I can actually spot other better moves here, and those were the better moves according to the computer. So sometimes, but definitely you need to think, right? You need to calculate or like what's something that is good for you, but then keep reassessing your position. Always your checks, captures, attacks, our checklist, keeping that in mind. So that will be a general tip from this tournament that I learned. Just take your time, calculate the different lines, go for something good, but then reassess it again. Not just like automatically make all the moves that you were thinking about, because as your opponents make certain responses, you might be able to find better responses for yourself. Yes? So that will be the general tip that I learned from this tournament. So I hope you guys are enjoying the content here, and I'll be bringing new playlists like chess concepts, the NCR playlist, and all those things. And I hope you guys have a good time. Thank you for the support, by the way. Thank you for the support. I love you guys.